Alberta's government has implemented mandatory literacy and numeracy assessments for students in grades 1 to 3. These assessments help identify students who are at risk of falling behind in their learning and development. Assessing students in their early years provides essential information to teachers, parents, and government about potential student learning issues and needs, and ensures students at risk get the help they need sooner. The government has provided the following assessments in French and English for school authorities to use: the letter name sound or LENS assessment, and the Castles and Coulthart 3 or CC3 assessment. These assessments and the government's initiative to make them mandatory are based on several research studies showing the benefits of early screening, including research conducted by Dr. Georgiou and Dr. Rauno Parrila. Dr. Alain Desrochers led the development of the French-language versions of these assessments. For this video, we asked Dr. Georgiou and Dr. Parrila to help explain what makes an assessment effective.
I am Dr. Georgiou. I'm a professor at the Faculty of Education at the University of Alberta. I am also a member of the UNESCO Canada Working Group in Education and a member of the College of the Royal Society of Canada.
I am Dr. Rauno Parrila. I'm a professor of education in Australian Catholic University, and I am the director of Australian Centre for the Advancement of Literacy.
A characteristic of effective literacy screeners is also their ability to accurately identify the ones that are really struggling, so they don't miss children that they have reading difficulties, but they are not identified with the assessments. So that kind of assessment needs to identify the ones that are really struggling and not the ones that do not.
So when you do an assessment, you can have false positives. So you identify some children who really aren't at risk as being at risk, or you can have false negatives, meaning that you miss some children who are really at risk, but they do a little bit better in the assessment. So there's one recent study that showed that using benchmark assessments accurately identified 54% of the at-risk children, but missed the other 46%. That is really dangerous because essentially they only took 1/2 of the children that needed intervention, and they would have taken only half of the children that needed intervention into the intervention group and left the other half without any intervention. So having false negatives is depriving children from the enhanced instruction that they need. Having false positives is not dangerous because all you do is you take a few extra kids and you give them some additional instruction that they may or may not need, but it certainly doesn't hurt them. So you need that level of accuracy, and that basically is the same as having a high reliability and validity in your assessments. Those tasks are assessing foundational reading skills, and they assess them in quite multidimensional manner. More multidimensional manner than many other assessments. So if you look at LENS, we are looking at how children learn the grapheme phoneme correspondences, the letter sound correspondences that they need to be able to decode. In CC3, we have a section that looks at their ability to use that knowledge, to apply those skills into words that they have never seen before, because they are non-words, or into regular words where they can partly rely on their experience with texts, and they may have those words in their vocabulary. But then we also have a different set of skills, as we assess a different set of skills in the exception word reading part. Now, exception words are words where only part of the word can be decoded correctly, and other parts of the words you need to know that, oh, this is not the typical decoding of that letter combination, this is something else. That part is interesting because it seems to tap on different skills than what the regular words tap on. So one thing that it taps on is your reading experience. So have you, particularly not so much in grade 1, but after grade 1, how much do you read? So that affects how well you do on that assessment. But more importantly, it taps on something called orthographic learning. And orthographic learning means that when we see a word in print, we might actually remember that word next time when we see it. Typically, we need to decode it a couple of times before we automatically recognize it. But to go from decoding to automatically recognizing words when you see them, you need orthographic learning skills. And the exception word reading part actually gives us information about those orthographic word reading skills. So you can have a child who learns to decode. They typically decode correctly but slowly, but they don't develop those orthographic skills, and they don't become automatic in recognizing words. So you see a sort of an uneven profile of these skill sets in CC3. Very few other word reading assessments give you that much information.
Well, we had data that were submitted to Alberta Education from schools at the beginning of the deployment of these assessments, and that was back in May 2020, right after the school closures, and the teachers were asked to send us their protocols so we could enter the scores item by item and calculate the reliability of these measures. They show that the reliability indices are higher than 0.95, and this means that they can, if we use the same instrument multiple times, we can get consistency in the scores of the children, and as opposed to unreliable assessments that today you can get a high score, but if we administer the same task 3 weeks later, you may get a low score. We also have data from some school divisions that have been using other reading assessments that are based on American norms, for example. And the kids that they are identifying as being struggling children are the same kids that CC3 and LENS also picks as being struggling kids. Now, when you want to calculate reliability, it's always good to calculate reliability based on children tested in the same place that you want to use the tasks. And by having data from Alberta kids, this makes these assessments better to use for the purpose of screening the children in Alberta and identify the ones that are struggling. And I think it's also important to add that we get the same high reliability indices for both the English version of the CC3 and LENS as well as the French version of the CC3 and the LENS that is also normed currently in schools in Alberta.
So a typical misconception of reliability is that it is a property of a test. So if you buy a test from, say, that has been normed in the United States and the manual says that the reliability coefficient is 0.9, that is a reliability coefficient in the sample of children they use to norm the test with the very well-trained assessors that they use to collect that data. It is not a reliability necessarily that you get when you use the same test in Alberta. It is important to understand that difference. Now, the reliability coefficient that we got is from Alberta teachers assessing Alberta students. So we have a very good high confidence on that reliability calculation. We have a very high confidence that it gives us right information, and we, on the basis of that information, we can confidently predict that other Alberta teachers will be able to use this test reliably. Any cutoff score that we use is somewhat arbitrary. A child who's in the 24th percentile is not a whole lot different from a child who's on the 26th percentile. However, 25th percentile is sort of the likely score. Sometimes we use 30 percentile if there are more resources available. Sometimes we use 20 percentile. My colleagues in Finland use often 16th percentile. And it only has to do with the resources available, then how many children can we take to the intervention? If you go to the 16th percentile, your likelihood of getting some false positives increases. So some children who need the intervention will not get the intervention. If you go to 25th percentile or to 30th percentile, your likelihood of getting false negatives increases.
And that's why Alberta Education selected the 25th percentile, because this is the one that is most commonly used in research and allows with enough confidence to say that we have identified and selected the right number of kids that will benefit from a reading intervention. Well, the question about confidence of selecting the right kids is answered if we look also at the kids that are identified with similar assessments of reading that are commercially available and highly reliable and valid. And the evidence we currently have from a few school divisions that they have this kind of data by administering other reading assessments that are commercially available and they are for purchase, show that the children that these assessments are identifying are the same children that the CC3 and the lens also identifies. And this gives us some confidence, high confidence, that we have good evidence to suggest the same kids are identified if you use these other commercially available assessments that you pay for, as opposed to CC3 and lens that are locally normed, which is the gold standard of assessment, highly reliable and also valid.
It's important, though, to keep in mind that the alternative assessment that Dr. Georgiou is talking about, they are not benchmark assessments. They are standardized, normed assessments that you purchase and use only for that purposes.
The purpose of the assessment is to identify the children who are struggling despite the fact that they have received some reading instruction and they have not benefited from that reading instruction, so we can provide them with intensive intervention from January all the way to May. Therefore, we require that there is some reading instruction time, and that time is between September and January. Assuming the schools have information from kindergarten, if the kids come from kindergarten to grade 1 in the same school, they already know who are the kids who might be struggling, and they may start providing reading intervention as early as September or October. They don't need to wait until January. Because the assessments have discontinuation rules, it means that some children will not see every single card. They don't see all the words, all 40 words in CC3 at once. They see them in groups of 10, and if they finish and they qualify for the next card, then they continue, and so on. So assuming the kids fail more than 5 items in a given card, then the next time they will do the task, then they will see the first card that has some words that they have not answered correctly the first time, but the second card that they will see was not shown to them before. So these will not be words that they had seen before, and therefore they could not memorize them.
For the most up-to-date information about the provincial screening assessments, please refer to the Provincial Assessment Hub on new.learnalberta.ca. Any further questions can be directed to litnumscreening@gov.ab.ca.